In the place where I live, it often rains. I don't know. Maybe that's why people in our city are always so gloomy. Just now, an old couple passed by, wearily splashing through puddles. The woman walked alongside, babbling something to her husband, whose face seemed to say, "Damn, I'm so fed up with everything." Behind them walked a middle-aged lady with a wrinkled nose, constantly sniffing and looking around, followed by a 5-year-old child. He joyfully jumped from puddle to puddle in red rubber boots, creating splashes of mud that flew, including onto his mother. Meanwhile, I sat by the window in a cozy diner, apathetically watching this gray picture. Suddenly I remembered how one of my acquaintances once speculated about why life in this city was so dreary. According to him, the Petersons were to blame. Who are they, you might ask? They are our neighbors. The town of Peterson was not far from us, just 10 miles amidst mountains and forests. Rumor had it that very strange people lived in this mysterious place. Some even said they were involved in Satanism or something like voodoo. Hardly anyone from our town goes there, and the residents of that town themselves don't visit us either. So, according to my acquaintance, although okay, I won't deceive you, I heard this story in a bar. It was told by one drunkard to everyone. So, according to him, the neighboring town seemed to suck the energy out of ours. When I heard this, I laughed out loud in the bar, but soon fell silent, realizing I was the only one laughing. How awkward it was. Goodness, people in this city are really superstitious, or do they really believe that Peterson is such a scary place? For me, it's all just stories, although I do keep one secret. The thing is, I'm originally from there. My father once lived in Peterson but ran away when he was young and begged me not to tell anyone about it. So I kept quiet, and as you can see, it paid off. Meanwhile, the rain outside intensified, creating a dense curtain of water through which it was difficult to see anything. I looked out the window, sipping coffee, when suddenly I saw a car stop on the other side of the street. A tall man got out of it, dressed in a dark coat, a white shirt with a starched collar, and black trousers. His ensemble was completed by polished shoes and white gloves. Elegantly opening an umbrella, he headed towards the diner. As he crossed the road, he glanced towards where I was sitting. Did he look at me, or was it my imagination? Soon he entered, shook off his umbrella, and without looking around headed towards me, leaving wet footprints behind. Hey, is he really coming to me? He stood opposite and bowed. I could see him closer now. He had a slender face, black eyes, and thin, dry lips, with a barely visible mustache above them. His face exuded elegance and pretentiousness. Hello, Mr. Red. My name is Alaric Winchester. I work as a butler. I came to inform you that your uncle Edgar Ravenwood has passed away, and since he has no heirs, all his property is being transferred to you. You must now ride with me to Peterson, and there I will explain. Hey, wait a minute, buddy. I looked around and realized that everyone in the diner was silently watching us. Damn, he said. Peterson, that word is taboo in this city. I gestured for him to come closer, showing with my hand for him to lean in, and whispered, Listen, pal, maybe we can talk somewhere else? We can talk in the car on the way, he said, not lowering his voice. Understood, this guy is unshakable. Well, I'll listen to what he has to say. I stood up, paid for the coffee, and left. The butler walked ahead, holding the umbrella over me while he himself walked under the pouring rain. I felt uncomfortable about this, so I quickened my pace. The butler opened the door for me, and before getting in, I took one last look at the diner and saw that all the customers were pressed against the window. Damn, looks like I'm in trouble. Rumors spread fast here, and everyone will find out that I have some connection to the neighboring town. Well, there's nothing I can do about it now. Getting into the car, I was surprised by how lavishly it was decorated. There was expensive upholstery, and when the door closed, I noticed golden or gilded handles on the doors. As I pondered this, the butler got behind the wheel and started the car. Then a light bulb went off in my head. This isn't a kidnapping, is it? Remember what all parents tell their children? Never get into a car with strangers. I asked the butler about this, but he didn't even smile, just shook his head. I had a bunch of questions in my head, and I started asking them, glancing at where he was taking me. Maybe you'll tell me where we're going. To my master's estate. There I will acquaint you with the will. I see, but you understand that I only agreed to sit in the car and discuss matters. I didn't agree to go with you, I said, grabbing him by the collar. You have nothing to worry about. I am doing you a favor after all. You will inherit a vast fortune. And how vast is that? I asked with a sigh. About 100 million, give or take. You need to ask the accountant. So that's where I should have started. Did I hit the jackpot? I wonder what my late father would say about me becoming the heir to such a fortune. Apparently he had wealthy relatives, and they somehow found me. I looked out the window and realized we were leaving the boundaries of our town. As we progressed, urban landscape slowly gave way to rural countryside. Residential houses were replaced by farms sprawling on both sides of the road. Then, as if by magic, the forest began. As we progressed, the forest around us seemed darker and more ominous. Tree branches intertwined over the road, creating the illusion of a tunnel swallowed by twilight. However, soon this sinister landscape was replaced. Before us appeared the town of Peterson. It was a small town with a population of only 2,000 people, where the architecture evoked the spirit of medieval Europe. Stone buildings with sharp roofs, narrow streets framed by cobblestone sidewalks, and antique lanterns, creating a unique atmosphere. Unlike my hometown, the people here seemed kind and cheerful. Openness and hospitality were written on their faces, which was a pleasant surprise for me. We drove down the main street and soon found ourselves in the forest again. Gradually it began to thin out, and in the distance I saw a rocky mountain at the base of which was situated a huge castle. Like a little kid, I grabbed the front seats and leaned forward, marveling at the sight. Well, you must forgive me for this after all. It's not every day that you become the owner of such wealth. My emotions soared, intending to break the upper limit of the scale, setting the tone for my upcoming adventure. However, the butler paid no attention to my exclamations and continued driving with a serious expression. Approaching the castle, I could get a better view of it. It was an impressive structure made of dark stone, its tall towers and spires reaching for the sky, creating a sense of power and eternity. Sharp arches and stained glass added mystery to the building, while gargoyles perched on the edges of the roofs seemed like guardians of ancient secrets. The gates were open, inviting us in. Around the castle stretched a wide moat which in ancient times served as protection against unexpected guests. Now it was bridged, leading straight to the main entrance. From a distance, the castle seemed almost impregnable, but with each step closer, it revealed new details. Intricate carvings on the stone, complex patterns on the stained glass, and delicate wrought ironwork. We stopped at the entrance, and I didn't wait for someone to open the door for me, but got out myself. Looking at the butler, I noticed his clear dissatisfaction with this. Maybe by doing so, I was taking away his job. Next time, I should be more tactful. He led me up the stone staircase leading to the entrance. Entering the castle, I found myself surrounded by wealth that literally stunned me. The majestic foyer with high ceilings and massive stone columns opened the doors to a world of luxury and refinement for me. Footsteps echoed on the marble floor, strewn with expensive carpets, filling the vast hall with antique furniture and works of art. In the middle of the hall hung a huge portrait. From it, a 50-year-old man with a stern face looked at me. He was clean-shaven, with a powerful nature reflected in his eyes, and he wore a black top hat. It felt like he lived in the past century. Apparently, he was my late uncle. Soon the butler led me to the study. It was a spacious room with heavy curtains on the windows and a huge wooden desk in the center. Behind the desk were tall leather armchairs, and around the perimeter of the room stood massive bookshelves filled with ancient volumes and rare manuscripts. I sat at the desk and documents were brought to me. They stated that I would inherit everything, but on the condition that I perform a certain ritual that would last for 3 weeks. Alaric would tell me all the details. I looked up in surprise at the butler. What kind of ritual was this? I hoped it wasn't anything illegal. No, sir, it's quite unusual, but my late master had, so to speak, peculiar interests. Fortunately, they were all harmless. Okay. What, for example, do I have to do? Nothing complicated. Just read a book to the deceased by candlelight in the basement. What? What kind of nonsense is this? It sounds creepy. Spending nights with a dead person in a dark basement. He's not a vampire, is he? I hope not. Although I don't believe in things like UFOs, vampires, werewolves, and other nonsense. The scariest creatures are humans. And I learned this lesson when once a crowd of punks beat me up behind a bar at night. I read the contract again and told the butler that I agreed. Then a man came out of the door who turned out to be a notary. Apparently they knew I wouldn't refuse. I signed the papers, after which I was escorted to my quarters. It was a huge bedroom with a large bed. Preparation for the ritual would begin in a week, and for now I could do anything I wanted. I decided that in the morning I would explore the castle and go to the town. Before going to bed, I decided to call my boss, Mr. Stevenson, whom I worked for delivering fried chicken. Taking the phone, I found that there was no signal here. Odd. Okay, I'll call from town tomorrow. At night, I had a nightmare. I don't remember what was in it, but I woke up all sweaty. My heart was pounding wildly, and my breathing was rapid. I don't know what could have scared me so much, but I spent the rest of the night just tossing and turning. In the morning, feeling completely exhausted, I took a shower and went to have breakfast. The dining room was huge, with spacious seating, in the center of which was a long table, reminiscent of those seen in movies about aristocrats. The butler solemnly served me some dish, but as soon as I tasted it, my face twisted in disgust. What kind of slop was this? The butler said it was some aristocratic dish. Well, no way, I want a simple burger, but he shook his head. They don't serve that here. Great. I asked him for the keys to the car, then headed to the garage. In the hangar, 5 impressive cars awaited me. In such moments, you realize how truly wealthy my uncle was. Pressing the button on the key fob elicited a response from the Porsche parked near the gates. Not a bad choice. Starting the engine, I left the castle grounds and soon found myself in the town. My search for a snack led me to the very center of Peterson. Looking around, I was surprised by the multitude of shops and crowds of people bustling about. I had no idea this town was so popular. I headed to a snack bar styled like a medieval tavern, which gave it a unique charm. Above the entrance hung a wooden sign neatly carved with symbols of beer and bread. Inside, I found myself in a cozy, small space, with wooden tables and benches serving as furnishings and massive wooden beams adorning the ceiling. The walls were decorated with various shields and coats of arms, creating an authentic medieval atmosphere. There were no customers in the tavern except for a beautiful girl with fiery red hair tied neatly in a ponytail, who was diligently wiping the counter and setting utensils in place. Approaching closer, I noticed cute freckles adorning her face, and her eyes sparkled with green flecks in the sunlight. I immediately liked her and decided to strike up a conversation. "Excuse me, I'm new to this town. Why is there such a buzz outside the shops?" I asked the girl. She smiled at me and replied, "Our town is known for producing high-quality perfume, which is in high demand among connoisseurs. And today, we just received a new shipment." "Ah, I see," I responded. "Maybe you'd like to order something?" she asked. "What do you have?" "I wouldn't mind a burger," I said. "Yes, of course. What will you be drinking?" "Just a cola, by the way. My name is Mike." I reached out my hand. To my delight, she shook my hand in return. "And I'm Sarah. Nice to meet you. Are you passing through town?" "No. I'm staying at the castle nearby," I replied. To which she sighed in surprise. "Oh, so you're the relative of the late Mr. Ravenwood?" I nodded, and she continued, "He was quite well known in our town, and the residents held him in high regard. So, apparently, my uncle was quite popular here. He was very wealthy, and that already sets you apart from the rest." While Sarah went to fulfill the order, a family couple entered the snack bar, both in their 40s, both brunettes, with pleasant faces adorned with smiles. They approached the counter and greeted me. I nodded in response, and they went into the kitchen. Soon, Sarah came out with the order. While I was eating, we struck up a conversation. It turned out that the couple who entered the snack bar were the owners, Mary and Ted Jeffersons. Sarah worked here and also happened to be the daughter of the owners of the perfume shop across the street. She also told me a lot of interesting things about this town. It has a fairly close-knit community that supports each other. The main sphere of activity is perfume production, and it's so good that clients come from all over the world. However, it's not sold to everyone. To get on the list, you need to have certain connections. People here don't look favorably upon modern technology. They live a lifestyle similar to the Amish, but not as radically. They use cars, some household appliances, but when it comes to information technology like the internet and television, they are prohibited. I checked my phone and realized that there was no signal even in town. Sarah didn't even have a mobile phone. It was really strange. Maybe the locals want to shield their children from the influence of the modern environment. I still didn't understand. Maybe it's because of such quirks that they are not liked in my hometown. While we were talking, another person entered the snack bar. He was a guy in his 20s, a little older than me, blonde, quite tall and handsome. He walked past us, waving to Sarah, and headed towards the kitchen. "That's Alex, the son of the owners," Sarah said. "We've been friends since childhood." "He doesn't really resemble his parents," I remarked. "Well, that's quite typical for our town," she said. "I don't look like mine either." Strange indeed. By the way, when I came to this place, I often found myself repeating this word. Strange. I finished eating and thanked Sarah, then asked where I could make a call. "You need to go further down the street. You'll see the administrative building there. It's tall and beautiful. You'll recognize it right away. That's the town hall. There will be a grumpy man sitting at the entrance. His name is Howard. Don't pay attention to his words, just ask to use the phone. He won't refuse." "I see, thanks." I'll probably come here every day since the food they serve at home is simply awful." Sarah smiled and nodded. After that, I walked out onto the street in high spirits and headed in the direction she indicated. Soon I found a large building made of red brick. The entrance door was tall. I pulled the handle and it was open. When I entered, I found myself in a long hallway. Walking along it, I found myself in a large room decorated with wood. Portraits of different people hung on the walls. Surprisingly, right in the center, on a prominent place, hung a portrait of my uncle. Did he own this town? To the right was a door with a sign that read Mayor. Next to it was a desk where a man in his 40s was sitting, slightly hunched over, with small, unpleasant eyes and a big nose. He looked at me as if to say, "What's this idiot doing here?" "Excuse me, could you please let me use your phone? There's no signal in town and I urgently need to contact someone." He sighed heavily and looked at me disapprovingly. "Ah, here we go. Everyone needs something here. Everyone's in a hurry. Well, the town without communication, and it seems I'm the last lifeline here. All right, tell me the number. But remember, I'm not a rescue service to jump at your first call." After dictating the number to him, he handed me the receiver. The phone was old-fashioned with a cord and I couldn't wander far. Howard, on the other hand, showed no signs of not intending to listen to my conversation. On the contrary, he stared at me, cocking his ear upward. It was slightly comical. But then someone picked up the phone on the other end. "Hello, I'm listening." "Boss, it's me. There's a situation." I didn't even finish my sentence before Mr. Stevenson started shouting through the receiver, clearly angry. He demanded to know where I had disappeared to, and complained about having to find a replacement for me. I pulled the receiver slightly away from my ear and noticed that Howard seemed to enjoy the scene. After the boss calmed down, I briefly explained to him that I had some unforeseen matters and that I was resigning. "I see. I don't know what's going on with you, but make sure to visit your aunt. She asked about you yesterday?" "Yes, thank you, boss. I was planning to visit her soon." With that, the conversation ended and I handed the receiver back to Howard. He smirked unpleasantly and pulled out a newspaper as if signaling for me to leave. I silently left and headed to my car. Then I returned to the castle. So passed the week. For lunch, I would drive into town to see Sarah. Each time, we would chat about various things, after which I would take dinner with me and return to the castle, where I would either wander around studying the architecture or simply sleep. Unfortunately, my sleep schedule was disrupted because I kept having nightmares every night that I couldn't remember. In the morning, I would wake up exhausted, so I had to sleep during the day. This situation really bothered me, but I kept repeating to myself like a mantra, 100 million, 100 million, and it helped a little. Actually, there wasn't much to do in the castle. It was boring, so I started going into town for dinner as well. Sarah and I became close friends. She told me about her years in Peterson, and I, in turn, told her about the outside world. Surprisingly, she didn't know a lot of things, probably because they didn't have a television. She read a lot, and her favorite author was Jules Verne. She dreamed of traveling, but it was forbidden for them to leave the town. This restriction bothered me. After all, she was already 20, the same age as me. It turned out that their coming of age happens at 22, after which they leave their town. But they can't go wherever they want. They have to attend university, which is located in the north of the country, where supposedly another community lives. People in this town were very kind and cheerful, unlike in my hometown, where everyone walked around with gloomy faces. Smiles never left people's faces here. Once I became curious about how the locals produced perfume, so I asked Sarah if I could visit their workshop. She said she would ask her parents. It would be great if they agreed. It would somehow diversify the gray weekdays. But with each passing day, an important event approached. Every Sunday, I had to perform a ritual, as stated in the will. Honestly, I was a little scared. The whole thing seemed suspicious. And so, the Sunday evening came when the clock showed 11:45. Someone knocked on my door and the butler entered. He asked me to follow him. On the way, we passed through halls illuminated by candles hanging along the walls. Yesterday, there were electric lamps here. It was interesting why they now lit candles. I continued to follow Alaric and nervously looked around. There was a mysterious and ominous atmosphere in the air. We passed through places familiar to me which I had explored over the past week, and approached a door that had previously been locked. When the butler opened it, I saw a staircase leading down, along which candles were hung illuminating the way. Descending it, I noticed that the basement was quite deep. We found ourselves in a huge room. It would probably be more appropriate to call this place not a basement, but catacombs. It was crossed by rows of columns, past which we walked until we reached a room, in the center of which stood a richly decorated wooden coffin, which was open. Around it, in a circle with a radius of about 10 feet, candles burned on tall candelabras. At the base of the coffin, near the head, stood an altar depicting an unknown creature with wings. I was surprised. Was it a vampire? I repeated these words to myself, not believing myself. When we entered the circle, I noticed a pentagram drawn on the floor with red paint. Was it really paint? Yes, it's not what I think it is it? To be honest, I was a little shaken. It was quite difficult to convey this gloomy atmosphere. Finally, we approached the coffin and I looked inside. There lay my uncle with his hands neatly folded on his chest as if he were immersed in prayer. His eyes were closed, creating the illusion of having just fallen asleep. His face was slightly gaunt and dry, as if he had passed away just a day ago. Surprisingly, the body showed no signs of decomposition. Maybe he was cremated? As I examined his face, I noticed that he was dressed in an exquisite suit. Alaric handed me a book and began to explain how to perform the ritual. I was supposed to stand by the coffin and read the incantation until 3 in the morning, trying not to be distracted. Then, when the gong sounded, I would have to spill a drop of blood on the altar. Here I objected. No one had previously mentioned that I had to harm myself. The butler tried to reassure me, assuring me that only a drop was needed. He handed me a small blade wrapped in sterile paper. I looked at it, pondering what to do next, and reluctantly took it. I thought a drop of blood wouldn't hurt me much, but I still felt uneasy. After that, the butler left the room, and I glanced at the clock. There were 5 minutes left until midnight. I decided to familiarize myself with the book. It was bound in old black leather, decorated with various symbols and pentagrams. Opening it, I found text in an unknown language, but there was a transcription written in small print on top. I flipped through the pages, and there were various creepy pictures. For example, one of them showed a group of people standing in a circle, in the center of which hung a person who seemed to be levitating unconscious as his limbs hung down. There were many other strange pictures. It all smelled of some kind of Satanism. But before I could dwell on this topic, the gong sounded. It meant it was time to start reading. I opened the book and began uttering the words unknown to me. At first it was difficult to pronounce them, but with time I improved. Occasionally glancing at the body, I realized my knees were shaking. Devil. What had I gotten myself into, and why was I so scared? I kept reading, and after about half an hour, my lips and tongue hurt from the unfamiliarity. But I didn't stop, repeating my mantra to myself. 100 million. 100 million. As the time approached the end, I was already in a trance. paying no attention to what was happening around me. But suddenly, I felt a faint breeze. Looking around, I saw that the flame of the candles was flickering as if some spectral creature had flown in. A shiver ran through me, but I continued reading until the gong rang. I put the book aside, took out the blade, pricked my finger, and dripped it onto the altar. The candles flickered again, and then settled down. After that, I collapsed on the floor with relief. It was truly exhausting. The butler hadn't returned yet. While I waited, I decided to take one last look at the deceased's body. To my bewilderment, I turned my head. Strangely, it seemed to me that his hands were folded differently. I approached closer. Could he be alive? I don't know why, maybe I'm crazy, but I decided to put my ear to his chest and listen. Thump, 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 thump. I heard the sound and got scared, jerking away sharply. But then I realized it was the beating of my own heart. Well, I'm an idiot. Stepping away from the coffin, I waited for Alaric, who arrived a minute later. He took the book and led me back to my room. That night I couldn't sleep. Walking in the garden the next morning, it seemed to me that yesterday's events were related to someone else. It was so irrational for me. Fortunately, the ritual only happened once a week. I decided to go to town and have breakfast there. When I entered the diner, smiling, Sarah greeted me, waving. "Good news, my parents agreed to show you the workshop. Tomorrow I'll ask for a day off and we'll go there together." "Awesome, thank you," I said excitedly. "It's on me. What would you like?" It would be nice if you brought back a book about travels." "No problem. I was actually planning to visit my hometown next week." Sarah thanked me. Well, she helped me. And besides, it was nice when she smiled like that. We chatted a bit more, and I returned to the castle where I slept all day. The next day, I stood in front of the shop called Night's Secrets. Soon, Sarah approached me, and we entered. The shop was small, but every item seemed precious. Bottles with liquids of various colors stood on beautiful glass shelves. Several visitors came up and sprayed some on their wrists, inhaling deeply. Euphoria spread across their faces. I became curious and wanted to try it too, but a couple entered the room. It was Sarah's parents. They looked about 35 or 40, quite young. Both were brunettes and quite attractive, like a pair of models. Sarah didn't resemble them at all. They approached me with wide smiles, shaking my hand. The woman spoke first. "Welcome, young man. We're always glad to meet Mr. Resinwood's relatives. Your name is Mike, right? I'm Eleanor, and this is Victor. We've been wanting to meet you for a long time." "Thank you, ma'am." I was a little embarrassed by such a meeting. "I'll stand at the counter and you can show them everything," Sarah's father said. After that, Eleanor led us to the back room. Walking down the corridor, we stood in front of a massive oak door, behind which a staircase leading down began. Descending, we found ourselves in a room illuminated by soft lamplight, filled with the aromas of essences and oils. The walls were lined with shelves of bottles and flasks of various shapes and sizes, each containing a unique scent. In the center of the room was a long table. The air was filled with a multitude of scents, from heavy and rich to light and airy, creating an incredibly complex yet harmonious bouquet. Next to each workstation were small scales, meticulously measuring each component, and glass stirrers. Antique books and notebooks with perfume formulas were scattered throughout the room, some of which seemed to hold secrets dating back centuries. In the corner of the room, I noticed complex distillation equipment, where the purest and most concentrated aromatic oils were slowly and carefully extracted. Hanging in the center of the room was a portrait, and it was him again, my uncle. Maybe he was a local sponsor, or more likely that was the case. I pushed these thoughts aside and began wandering around the room, examining the books and instruments. Soon Sarah's mother began showing the production process. She started with how the best ingredients are carefully selected. Every component here is the result of careful attention, she explained, pointing to the shelves of bottles filled with essential oils and extracts. Then Eleanor showed how these components are combined in strict proportions. Creating perfume is an art that requires perfection at every stage, she said, carefully blending oils in a special mixer to achieve the perfect aromatic combination. And most importantly, in our work, there's a secret ingredient that's passed down to us as an inheritance. Taking a test tube with oils, she dripped from a pipette filled with shiny red liquid. When the red drop reached the oils, I noticed a small puff of smoke, and I swear, I thought I saw a skull in it. What kind of secret ingredient was this? I asked her, but she put her finger to her lips, winked at me, and said it was a secret. After the mixture was blended, it was sent to mature in a specialized room, where the scent developed its true depth and richness. This process can take from several days to several months depending on the specific perfume, noted Eleanor, passing by the glass bulbs containing darkening liquids. In the end, she demonstrated the stage of bottling the finished perfume. We watched as the equipment carefully filled each bottle, after which they were sealed and labeled. Each bottle is a message from us to the world, said Eleanor, handing me one of the bottles. We aim for our scents to evoke memories, dreams, and even inspire new stories. Wow. It felt like I was at some kind of performance. When it was all over, we headed towards the exit, and there Victor asked, "So, how was it?" "Amazing," I replied, thanking them for their time. After that, Sarah and I decided to take a walk and explore the city. It took up the whole day, but I had a great time. The week flew by quickly. I continued to visit the town, where I would have lunch or just stroll around, then return to the castle. During my visits, I noticed that there were no hotels in this town. Visitors quickly bought what they needed from the shops and left. Some of them even had frightened faces as if they knew something. It was suspicious. This town was hiding something. I was sure of it. But what? Honestly, it was hard to suspect these kind and sweet people. My nightmares intensified. Now they became clearer, and it seemed like I would remember what I dreamt of just a bit more. It was stressing me out. I even thought about sleeping somewhere else. But it was forbidden by the contract. In such moments, I continued to repeat my mantra about money. It was already past midnight when I stood with a book in my hands and read what seemed to be a spell. I even thought the corpse would soon rise and ask what time it was. Okay, no jokes, I was actually scared. When I saw the body this time, it seemed fresher. Or was all this the result of lack of sleep? I decided not to think about it and finish quickly and get out of here. When the gong rang and I dripped a drop of blood onto the altar, I saw the familiar draft, making the candle flames tremble. After that, terrifying screams sounded from somewhere. What was that? I was horrified, looking around but saw nothing. Soon the butler returned, and I finally left that place. The next day I woke up around noon. I could only fall asleep towards the morning. After taking a shower, I decided to head to the city. Passing by the houses, I saw that they were festively decorated. Flowers and posters with congratulations were everywhere. Congratulations on coming of age." I looked around in bewilderment, surprised by the scale of the celebration. When I reached the diner, I met Sarah there. Taking a seat, I ordered lunch and started to wait. Suddenly, I felt the need to use the restroom, so I went, and when I returned, I saw an envelope lying where I had been sitting. I picked it up and turned it in my hands. There were no inscriptions on it. At that moment, Sarah brought me food. I pointed out my find to her. "Do you know who could have left this?" "I don't know. It seems like nobody was here," she replied. "Weird." I sat down and began to open it, asking in the process, "What's the celebration going on outside?" "Yes, you don't know. Today is Sophia's coming-of-age ceremony. I don't know if you've met her. Remember I told you that when someone in this town turns 22, they're sent to study at Moonhaven. Because of this, the city administration holds a celebration. Today at 3 p.m., there will be an initiation ceremony on the square. We can go there together." I looked at her as she enthusiastically talked about the process, but for some reason, I had a bad feeling. And I asked, "Has anyone ever come back from there?" Sarah thought for a moment and replied, "No, I don't remember anyone like that. But the parents of those who left often visit them and say that after graduation they stay up north. They describe this place as the best on earth, and no one wants to leave." It all sounded kind of utopian. Opening the envelope, I found a note inside, written in beautiful calligraphic handwriting. Here's what it said: "You are in mortal danger. If you want to survive, you must uncover the secret of this town. To do this at 3 p.m., when everyone will be at the celebration, sneak into the town hall and explore the archives." That was the end of the warning. I turned the paper, trying to find more. Was this some kind of joke? I showed the note to Sarah. She read it and had a surprised and wary expression on her face. "What do you think about this?" I asked. "I don't even know. It could be a prank, but why not go and check?" I pondered. What if I really was in danger? Then, remembering what I had been doing at night in the basement, I decided to find out what this secret was after all. Sarah and I stayed in the diner until 2:30, then, closing it, pretended to take a stroll and headed towards the town hall. We waited for a while to make sure there were no outsiders. Apparently, everyone had already gathered in the square, and then headed towards the entrance of the large red brick building. Before entering, I looked around. It was clear. Pulling the handle, I realized it wasn't locked. We slipped inside and walked down the corridor until we reached the familiar room with portraits and the table. I expected that grumpy man to be sitting behind it, but he wasn't there. Where could the archive be here? Sarah pointed me to the door opposite the mayor's office. I pulled the handle. Surprisingly, it was unlocked, as if someone intentionally left it open. Stepping inside, we found ourselves in a large archive, where rows of tall shelves stretched up to the ceiling, laden with folders and documents. Carefully, trying not to make unnecessary noise, we began to search for information among the dusty shelves. Soon, Sarah quietly called me over. Approaching her, I saw that she was holding a folder with documents about children. They were old records neatly filed containing names, birth dates, and other important information. There was Sarah's card, too, stating that she was from North Carolina and her parents died in a car accident. I looked at Sarah, who had a detached expression. It was hard to accept, finding out that your parents aren't real. I put my hand on her shoulder, trying to comfort her, which brought her back to her senses, and she continued to sort through the cards, then looked at me with fear in her eyes. Here are all the children living in the town. It turns out they're all adopted. It was a shock. So all the residents of this town were infertile, or what does this mean? We continued our search, but found nothing significant. After putting everything back in its place, we left the building and headed to the square. Sarah walked with her head down, lost in thought. I was trying to figure things out too. It was no wonder that neither she nor Alex, the son of the diner's owners, resembled their parents. Everything fell into place. Now we needed to understand why they couldn't have their own children. Maybe it's some kind of cult. I wonder if they abducted the children or if it was legal adoption. Lost in my thoughts, we didn't notice how we reached the square. The ceremony was already ending, and I saw a young blonde girl standing on a high stage, waving happily to everyone. Next to her stood a tall, stunning woman in a business suit. I asked Sarah who it was, and she didn't answer right away, as if lost in thought. "That's the mayor of the town," she said, again lost in her thoughts. Poor thing. It takes time to digest such news. Soon people started dispersing, and we headed towards the diner. Suddenly, I felt like there was something in my pocket. Putting my hand in, I pulled out an envelope. Suddenly, I sharply turned around, feeling someone's presence, but there was absolutely no one around. How could I have missed the moment when someone, unnoticed by me, slipped me an envelope? Tearing it open, I found a note inside that read, "Well done. Now you must visit the Forgotten Garden at midnight. It's dangerous, so sneak in unnoticed." I started looking around again. Someone was watching us, but who? I showed the letter to Sarah, and we decided that we must uncover the secret. Returning to the castle, I looked for the butler, but he was nowhere to be found. Where did he disappear to? In the evening, I returned to the town again. Driving down one of the streets, I saw Sarah, who was waiting for me, head bowed and lost in thought. We left the car and walked to the outskirts of the town where the Forgotten Garden was located. This place was carefully hidden behind an old stone bridge in the most secluded corner of the town park. The garden was surrounded by tall, densely intertwined trees, forming a natural wall that concealed it from prying eyes. In the center of the garden was a small clearing with an ancient circle of stones resembling megaliths. We sneaked in and realized that nobody was there yet. There was still an hour until midnight, and we decided to find a hiding spot. To the right of the clearing were dense bushes where we climbed. Sarah told me that they often played here in their childhood, but she had no idea that something strange was happening here at night. What exactly? We were soon to find out. Closer to midnight, we heard footsteps, and figures dressed in cloaks emerged onto the clearing. There were about a dozen of them. They spread out in a circle, after which the last person in a cloak emerged from behind the trees, leading a captive bound with ropes. "Sophia," whispered Sarah. I looked closer and recognized the blonde girl I saw today in the square. What were they going to do? Does this mean they do belong to some kind of cult? While I was contemplating, they led the captive to the center of the circle. She looked around in fear, tears streaming down her face, asking why, for what. It was a horrifying sight. I thought we should intervene, but most likely, we would have been caught. Soon, people began chanting hymns in an unknown language. Listening closely, I realized they sounded similar to the ones I read in the basement. Suddenly, the girl stopped crying and screaming. Her eyes became empty, after which she was abruptly lifted upwards as if there was a rope tied to her waist, her limbs hanging down, and she floated in the center of the circle. Seeing this scene, Sarah tried to break free from the bushes. I managed to grab her and cover her mouth. "Stay. You can't help her." She struggled, but then what happened next made her freeze. The hoods fell from the heads of the people, revealing their faces. I recognized most of them. It was the mayor of the town, that grumpy man who worked as her secretary. And there was my butler Alaric, so that's where he disappeared to. But there were also those who shocked Sarah, her parents. They continued chanting the incantation when suddenly a red essence burst out of the girl's body. It wasn't blood, but something in the form of gas. It streamed out in thin jets and flowed towards the figures. Meanwhile, the girl's body began to wither right before our eyes. At the end, the last jet burst out of her and hung in the air, spinning and contracting until it turned into a liquid. Sarah's mother approached and held out a flask, and the red, shiny substance flowed into it. That was the secret ingredient. Then the girl's body burst into flames, and it turned into ash, scattering in the wind. My God, everything happened so quickly that I didn't have time to be scared. But fear slowly began to creep into my mind. I looked at Sarah, who was pale and had wet eyes. The procession began to disperse slowly, when suddenly one figure looked in our direction. Perhaps he heard the noise in the bushes and decided to check. It was that grumpy man, Howard. I thought it was the end for us, as he got closer and closer to us. Then we jumped up and ran. We heard shouts behind us and realized we were being chased. We ran as fast as we could through the park, but we felt like we were being chased. Sarah started falling behind. Then suddenly, ahead of us, we saw a figure waving to us. It was Ted Jefferson, the owner of the diner. We hurried towards him. He stood at the entrance to an underground grotto, hidden from view, holding a disguised door handle covered in grass. As we approached, he shouted for us to jump inside. Without hesitation, we leaped in and he followed, closing the door behind us. The pit wasn't deep. We heard someone run past and held our breath. Soon everything went silent, and we breathed a sigh of relief. I looked at Ted, who simply said, "Follow me," and led the way out. We took back roads until we reached the town. There, we got into Ted's car and drove to the diner. When we entered, Mary, the owner, was waiting for us. Seeing our shocked faces, she asked us to sit down and poured some tea. Then she said, "It seems you have a lot of questions. Of course, what was that in the park? And how did you know we would be there?" I exclaimed, visibly shaken. "I believe you've already guessed that it was us who sent you those letters. I'm sorry we put you in danger, but it was the only way to make you believe us," Mary said, looking at us in turn. "To understand what's happening here, we need to go back to the beginning. And it all started about 150 years ago. Your uncle, Edgar Ravenwood, was an ordinary man living in his castle at the time. Even then, his wealth was considerable. But suddenly he fell ill with an incurable disease. In search of a cure, Edgar invited the best doctors, but none of them could help him, leaving him hopeless. Then a mysterious stranger in a dark hooded cloak appeared, offering a cure for his illness. But the price of this healing was to be the life of Edgar's son. Your uncle, being a malicious man, albeit adept at hiding it from others, agreed without hesitation. The stranger took his son, but left him a book that contained the secret to eternal life. Studying it, your uncle uncovered many secrets. One of them was the method of producing perfume from the essence of human life, the very process you witnessed today. Moreover, consuming this essence allowed one to prolong their own life. Edgar needed followers and supporters who would sustain and enrich him. He didn't have to search for long. At that time, the villages were ravaged by plague, and finding those who wanted to live forever was not a problem. So he found us. Soon he gathered people who formed a settlement named after that stranger, who was called Gregory Peterson. Soon we began to consume the essence of people abducted from villages, thereby extending our lives. But over time, we encountered several problems. Firstly, we could no longer have children, which came as a shock to many. Some even ended their lives because of it. Secondly, to produce the perfume, we needed people with a special aura, untainted by life's hardships and problems. Otherwise, the scent of the essence was repulsive. Finding such people was difficult, so it was decided to abduct children and raise them in love and care, shielding them from the horrors of the outside world. As time passed, there were couples who, after raising a child, refused to sacrifice them. In those cases, they were simply executed. Initially, there were twice as many residents in this village. Only those who were cruel or frightened remained. Over time, we mastered the art of hiding our true emotions, displaying only kindness and smiles. Our perfume gained fame, bringing us not only profit but also the ability to prolong our lives. Wait, so you mean you're vampires? And why is my uncle lying in a coffin if you're immortal? I interrupted, unable to believe what was happening. You could call us vampires, but we don't have any special powers. Only your uncle is different. He gained power from the Elder, so he possesses superhuman abilities. Why did he die? Actually, he didn't. Right now, he's in a deep sleep. It's because of the curse. When he sold his own son, he was cursed, and every 50 years he enters a state of hibernation. If a blood relative doesn't recite the incantation and sacrifice themselves, he'll die. Wait, did you say sacrifice? I exclaimed in shock. So that's what you meant by danger in that letter. Exactly. When the final session is over, you'll perish. But wait, I don't have any children. So how will he perform the ritual next time? Oh, that's not a problem. You actually have plenty of blood relatives across the country. You were chosen because of your father. In reality, he was murdered. After these words, I looked at her in astonishment. My father was murdered, but why? I had a million questions swirling in my mind. I don't know the exact reason. Perhaps he knew some secret. All I know is that he lived in the castle and then he escaped. After her words, silence fell. We pondered what we had heard, trying to decide what to do next. But suddenly Sarah jumped up, trembling all over and clenching her fists, and angrily asked, "Why did you betray them? What's in it for you telling us everything, and why didn't you help Sophia?" Mary sighed heavily, and then Ted replied, "It's because of our son, Alex. We love him so much that we can't let him die. His birthday is next week, which means he'll perish. As for Sophia, we couldn't have helped her even if we wanted to. There's no escaping from here. You don't know how powerful these people are, and if you try to escape, they'll find you without much effort." After these words, I remembered how the butler found me the first time, as if he knew exactly where I would be. "So our only hope is to kill Edgar," Ted continued, "but the problem is, we don't know how. He's invulnerable. Many have tried to eliminate him, but it always ends in failure. If you don't know, how am I supposed to know? Perhaps your father knew something, so before Sunday arrives, you must find out. Otherwise, you'll perish, just like all of us. And you can't help us. Unfortunately, your uncle can control us, and we can't directly harm him." Wow, my whole world turned upside down in just one day. Vampires, conspiracies. If I were smarter, I would have understood everything sooner. Although, on the other hand, it's very hard to believe all of this. It was already late at night. I left the diner and headed to the castle. The butler wasn't there yet, so I went to my chambers. In the morning, rising early and starting up my Porsche, I headed to my hometown, Will Creek. I needed to visit my aunt. As I drove, I thought about yesterday. So much had happened. I wondered about Sarah. I would have to visit her on the way back. Soon I found myself in my hometown, realizing how much I missed this place. Pulling up to my aunt's house, I parked opposite it. A few neighborhood boys ran up to me, marveling at my car. I climbed the porch steps and knocked. A woman in her 50s opened the door. It was Aunt Lucy. She wasn't actually related to me. She and my father were friends, and after his death she looked after me. As I reached out for a hug, she just gave me a stern look and nodded for me to come in. Stepping into the kitchen, she poured me some coffee and asked irritably, "Where have you been? Why didn't you tell me anything? You know I've been worried sick. Maggie, my friend, was right about the troubles you'd bring." "Sorry, Auntie, I had urgent matters." I didn't tell her the details, not wanting to worry her. She kept probing for a while, trying to find out the truth, but then she sighed and said, "Well, the main thing is that you're alive and well, and that's all that matters." "I'm so glad to see you. Besides you, no one would have cared about me," I said. "Stop it, your Uncle Harry was worried too when you disappeared like that. Apologize to him for me. By the way, Auntie, I wanted to ask, did Dad leave anything behind after his death?" I asked. "So that's why you came, you scoundrel. I thought you missed your old aunt. Just a moment." She struggled to get up and headed to her bedroom, then returned holding something. "Here. It's your father's diary. I found it in a hiding spot he told me about, instructing me to give it to you only when you asked." I was surprised and thanked my aunt. We chatted for a bit, and then, saying our goodbyes, I left. Leaving town, I pulled over to the side of the road and began to read the diary. In it, my father recounted his life, how he met my mother, how I was born, his thoughts and experiences. It was a treasure trove of memories for me, but I was looking for something to help me at that moment, and finally found it. Here's what was written there. "Son, if you're reading this diary, it means my fate has caught up with you. You probably already know about it, but I'm from Peterson and grew up with Uncle Edgar. My childhood was happy. I didn't know any worries, and the people around me were always glad to see me. But one day, I saw something I shouldn't have. I learned the terrible secret of this town when I was 10 years old, and it turned my life upside down. I decided to escape, but before that I had to gather information that would help me in the future. For 5 years I watched Uncle Edgar, searched the entire castle for his secrets, and one day found a book. This book was his strength, but at the same time, his weakness. I noticed that one page was torn out of the book, and I suspected it wasn't just a coincidence. I began searching for it, and eventually found it. It was hidden inside an ancient clock mechanism in the tower facing east. To access the hidden page, you need to manually activate the mechanism by turning certain gears in the right order. Below, I've drawn how to do it. But most importantly, it contains instructions on how to kill Uncle. You need to recite the incantation and thrust a stake of ash wood into his heart. Yes, the old legends were not lying. I left the page in place, afraid of arousing suspicion. After learning the necessary information, I fled from home. Surprisingly, no one searched for me, although I was literally under their noses. I'm sure they knew where I was, but left me alone. Although I'm sure that someday they'll come for me. I hope this information helps you. Forgive your wayward father for bringing you trouble, and remember, I always loved you." With these words, the message ended. His words touched me, making me contemplate for a while. Coming to my senses, I started the car and headed to Peterson. I needed to stop by the diner and discuss my find. When I entered, There were no customers, only Sarah standing at the counter. It reminded me of the moment I first met her, except then she was cheerful, and now she had a blank expression. I showed her the diary and she called the Jefferson couple. They were surprised by the discovery and at the same time pleased. We discussed the plan and decided to act immediately, without waiting for Sunday. First, Ted went to make the Ashwood steak. We waited for him for half an hour, and he returned with it. It was about a foot long and looked very sharp and sturdy. Then Mary went to the pantry and pulled out a couple of pistols and an M4 rifle. Sarah and I were shocked. This couple was not as simple as they seemed. We packed the weapons and steak into a large bag and headed out onto the street. The Jeffersons asked us to wait for them a bit. When they returned, we got into the car and drove off. In 15 minutes, we were at the castle. Ted parked his pickup truck opposite the gates and we all got out. The butler rushed out to meet us. How did he know we were coming? He tried to block our way but received a sharp blow to the temple from Ted, knocking him unconscious. He fell, losing consciousness. Apparently they were right that the local vampires were no different from ordinary people. Dragging the butler inside and tying him up, we headed towards the tower. Climbing up, I started searching for the mechanism indicated in the diary and finally found it. Turning the gears, I heard a clicking sound, and a golden-trimmed chest emerged from the wall in front of me. When I opened it, a deafening alarm sounded similar to the one in emergencies. Ted's face paled and he shouted, "Damn, that's the danger signal. When it sounds, everyone in the town must rush here. We need to hurry." Quickly pulling out the page, we rushed down to the basement. When we reached the door, I pulled out the keys we took from the butler. My hands trembled as I sorted through them one by one until I finally heard the long-awaited click. The door opened and we headed down. Ted and Mary stayed at the entrance, ready to give resistance if needed. As we descended, we saw candles burning. We ran towards the coffin, deciding to hurry since a crowd of angry vampires was approaching the castle. The coffin stood in the same place. I handed Sarah the page to recite the incantation, as there was a transcription there too, while I took the stake intending to drive it in when she finished. Approaching, I was surprised by my uncle's transformation. His face looked fresher, but it was more sunken and his ears sharpened like an elf's. I didn't know why this happened. Perhaps this was his true form, but he looked terrifying. I stood on one side of the coffin, and Sarah stood on the other. Getting ready, she began to recite, while I, gripping the stake with both hands, pressed it against my uncle's chest around the heart. My hands were shaking. I tried to calm down and catch my breath after the run. Sarah continued to recite, and I thought it was the end, but suddenly someone grabbed my hand. It was my uncle. His eyes burned with an unnatural light, and his razor-sharp teeth were inches from my face. He hissed, and I felt his incredible strength as he lifted into the air, taking me with him. Seeing what was happening, Sarah froze in shock for a moment. But my cry made her gather her strength and continue reading. While she recited the spell, I struggled with my uncle in the air, trying to keep the stake against his chest. My hands were shaking, but I gripped the stake tighter, while my mind searched for ways to defeat him. My uncle tried to push me away. His grip was like icy tongs, but in the depths of his gaze I saw a momentary hesitation. He seemed shocked by the situation. I seized this moment, gathering my willpower, and made a sudden lunge forward, increasing the pressure of the stake on his chest. Despite her fear, Sarah continued to recite the spell faster and more confidently. Her voice sounded like music in the chaos. As she neared the end, the air around us vibrated with magical energy. Desperately, my uncle tried to fly higher with me, but I knew this was his last chance to escape fate. When Sarah uttered the last words of the spell, the air around us ignited with a bright light, and I felt the magical force strike my uncle. In that moment, I gathered all my strength and thrust the stake directly into his heart. His cry of desperation and pain shattered the silence of the night. His body began to slowly disintegrate into ashes, carried away by the wind until it disappeared completely. A moment later, I found myself standing on the ground, staring at the spot where I had just fought for my life. Sarah approached me, her eyes full of tears, but gratitude and relief were evident in them. We had won. The spell was spoken and my uncle was defeated. But our joy didn't last long. Gunshots rang out from above and we hurried towards the exit. At the entrance, the Jefferson couple stood, firing at a huge crowd of vampires. The mayor peeked out from behind a column, shouting that he wanted to talk, but Mary shouted that we wouldn't fall for that trick. Seeing us and realizing that we had completed the task, Ted informed his wife, who smiled happily. Then he pointed to the door on the right, whispering that they would distract the enemies and we should run. This path would lead us to the exit bypassing the enemies, where the pickup truck was parked. "When you leave here, be sure to take Alex with you and leave the town. In the trunk, you'll find 3 bags, one for each of you, with money that will help you for a while. Go as far away as possible and live happily," Ted said. "But what about you?" Sarah whispered. "Our fate is to stay here and take as many of them as possible. Don't worry about us." But Ted interrupted her and forcefully dragged us to the exit while Mary opened fire, distracting the enemy. We opened the door and saw a long corridor. Sarah still hesitated, but Ted yelled, "Run now!" And we ran. I roughly knew the way, and bypassing the castle from the side, I breathed a sigh of relief. There was no one near the pickup. Getting into the car, I started it up and floored the gas pedal. We raced towards the town. Arriving at the diner, we found Alex there, who was worried and waiting for us. His parents had already told him the whole truth and ordered him to leave the town immediately. Meeting us and not finding his parents nearby, he couldn't hold back tears. We hurriedly helped him pack his things, and then we all left the town together. As soon as we arrived in Wilcrick, I immediately approached the nearest payphone and called the police. In the conversation, I decided not to delve into the supernatural details and focused on more earthly matters. I reported that there were kidnappings happening in Peterson and that there was currently a shootout at the castle. I also added a few other details to give my words more weight. After this incident, we left those parts forever. What happened to that place after we left remains a mystery to me. News of the events in Peterson never reached us, and over time that place became a distant memory, shrouded in rumors and speculation in my mind.